All right, for those of you in the gallery waiting for E3, which is the encampment management approach, I'm going to turn things over to, I think, Mr. Babbage, and off to Mr. Davey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, the report before you has several recommendations regarding an approach to encampment management and associated issues. I'd ask Mr. Davey if he could please present this report to Council, and he and I and several other staff in the gallery would be available for questions following.
Mr. Davey.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'll cover this report in four sections. First, the concept of a centralized encampment management approach. Second, tying this into the proposed amendments to the Parks and Open Spaces bylaw to include one or more centralized overnight sheltering locations. Third, the proposed amendments to the Safe Streets bylaw, which serves as the enforcing mechanism of the centralized approach. And finally, I'll provide an update on the Lower Patricia encampment from the public safety perspective. Additionally, two alternative options provide off-ramps to allow further time to consider this file, should Council wish. And to clarify, this proposed approach comes from a regulatory enforcement lens. We have a police superintendent, deputy fire chief, and bylaw services manager in attendance to answer any operational questions from their respective departments as well. Should Council have any questions related to housing, complex needs, addiction, mental health, and public health, I would defer to BC Housing and Northern Health. So number one, the proposed centralized encampment management approach. So there are two methods that cities across BC have taken on attempting to address homeless encampments: centralized and decentralized. Prior to 2020, Prince George practiced an ad hoc decentralized approach. It was not planned, but that is how we operated. So for context, we had approximately 90 significant encampments of 2 or more structures that were removed in 2019. Decentralized encampments see a dispersal throughout the community, and it tends to be less visible as a result. So for example, the District of Saanich uses a decentralized approach with around 75 permitted locations throughout that community. In Prince George, we now have an unregulated centralized approach occurring. So this began last summer with sites emerging at Millennium Park, 2nd and George Street, and Lower Patricia. Staff removed the encampments at Millennium Park. However, many occupants moved down the street to 2nd and George and then on to Lower Patricia. So the court injunction authorized the city to close the encampment at 2nd and George, and the court found that Lower Patricia could remain. So in other words, the city does not have the authority to remove the Lower Patricia encampment. The proposed centralized approach uses bylaw education by informing people what the city's bylaws entail, and enforcement to permit overnight sheltering in a limited number of specific locations under prescribed restrictions. And for context, both the cities of Kamloops and Kelowna use centralized approaches. Neither approach is better, and each produces trade-offs and costs. Given the provincial Supreme Court ruling of allowing the Lower Patricia encampment to remain, administration suggests that in practice, a centralized approach is how the ground looks and is likely to stay until this winter. And to be clear, regardless of what decision the city takes, the actual management or eventual reduction of encampments is unlikely. In other words, the city lacks both the capability and capacity to actually manage encampments, let alone solve them. This is specifically a provincial government responsibility. 2, Parks and Open Spaces bylaw proposed amendments. So in order to centralize encampments, amendments to the Parks and Open Spaces bylaw are required to define locations and under what conditions overnight sheltering is permitted. So there are 5 maps attached of city-owned green spaces within the larger bowl area. One criteria considered important from a legally defensible position is to ensure encampments are accessible for emergency and social services and within walking proximity to social services. The 5 locations for consideration are Lower Patricia, which regardless of Council's direction, will remain as is given the Supreme Court's 2 rulings. The other 4 locations reflect where a majority of open-air drug markets and its associated behaviours exist or frequently occur in. These are Millennium Park, the outer rim of Connaught Hill, and 2 segments of Carrie Jane Gray Park. So administration seeks Council direction on selecting one or more of these locations or alternatives. A few points to consider. The proposed amendments authorize overnight sheltering between 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. Shelters must be taken down by 9 a.m. However, bylaw services and Parks and Solid Waste services are complaint-driven and calls for service enter a queue. Therefore, depending on the call volume, we will likely be in constant catch-up mode. We cannot prove that occupants were offered shelter space the night before. There are a multitude of shelters and social service options with numerous operators. So there's no central information collection point, and because of this, the city does not have the ability to track real-time numbers. One main theme throughout this report is it takes a perspective of operational feasibility. That is, what is actually achievable at the boots-on-the-ground level given current resources. These 5 proposed locations for consideration is built off that concept. Simply put, this is where people hang out. So selecting a location out of the bowl area is unlikely to shift encampments. Finally, the city does not have the legal authority to ban overnight sheltering. Therefore, the status quo option, that is, not selecting a location and defeating the recommendations, implies 2 realities. 1, Lower Patricia remains, and 2, the city does not have the lawful authority to remove encampments on any park space until we codify where overnight sheltering is authorized. 3, Safe Streets Bylaw proposed amendments. So combined with the Parks and Open Spaces Bylaw, the Safe Streets Bylaw provides the forcing mechanism to centralize encampments. The proposed amendments to the Parks and Open Spaces Bylaw defines locations to overnight shelter in city green spaces, and the Safe Streets Bylaw encourages folks to not engage in problematic behaviors that lead to conflicts in the use of public space. So to summarize, this bylaw came into effect last year, and to date, we have used it as an educational and informational tool. We have not issued any tickets yet. So to clarify, education from the bylaw services perspective means informing people of what behaviors and under what criteria are prohibited under the Safe Streets Bylaw. Bylaw Services works closely with the city's social outreach worker pilot program and the numerous other social agencies at the Community Safety Hub in connecting people with a wide variety of services. I would defer to Ms. Bone on this should any questions arise. The proposed amendments give the city the authority to remove discarded and abandoned debris and personal property on city streets, sidewalks, and boulevards. A progressive ladder of escalation is provided as an example in the report for context on how the bylaw may be operationalized. And to briefly summarize, the Safe Streets Bylaw targets 5 problematic behavior categories. 1, obstruction of sidewalks and other passageways. 2, solicitation around businesses. 3, open drug use. 4, open-air burning, and 5, graffiti. These behaviors tend to fall below the threshold of criminal charges. The report contains a bylaw services call for service chart with data on problematic behaviors over the previous 5 years. Of note, calls have grown from approximately 155 in 2017 to 2,293 in 2020. Last year in 21, there were 2,239 calls for service for the same categories. And to state again, enforcement and regulation will not solve the social issues facing our community. The city does not have the resources, expertise, or jurisdictional authority to solve the complex and interrelated social challenges of the drug epidemic, mental health issues, homelessness, and prolific criminality. The Safe Streets Bylaw is but one tool the city has within our jurisdictional toolbox to perhaps better manage conflict of use of space issues. 4, Lower Patricia encampment update. So this site continues to represent a high risk to human health and life safety. Following BC Housing's successful voluntary rehousing initiative last winter that saw approximately 50 folks move from Lower Patricia to the Knights Inn, only 1 to 3 occupants were noted throughout the winter. Since the start of summer, some 30 to 70 people are believed to be occupying Lower Patricia. At present, there are approximately 30 structures as well. We do have significant concern with this site, and the grounds in which the city sought an injunction to close the site have deteriorated even further, in our opinion. To be clear, our understanding is that the city does not have the lawful authority to shut the site down, until which time all occupants have suitable housing in accordance with the Chief Justice's ruling. Prince George Fire Rescue hand-distributed approximately 20 fire safety pamphlets last week in an attempt to encourage occupants to make their structures less prone to fire. A few points to note. The RCMP and PG Fire Rescue have been called to the site on numerous occasions. We've had 3 significant fires in the previous few weeks, including one over the weekend. Additionally, it appears that some people have moved to occupy Millennium Park, which has approximately 6 structures and about a dozen people situated there as of earlier today. So first responder safety is our top priority, and the Lower Patricia encampment currently compromises this. Again, any questions related to suitable housing, complex needs, mental health supports, and public health ought to be directed to the province via BC Housing and Northern Health. So in closing, Your Worship, in my opinion, solving what may be referred to as a wicked problem of substance abuse, mental health issues, and the resulting homelessness at the local government level is like trying to eat soup with a knife, and the province has the spoon. The Public Safety Department is operationally focused. We exist to provide safety to the public through the provision of policing, fire, emergency management, and bylaw services. So to be clear, the proposed recommendations are from a regulatory enforcement lens that views the situation as it is and not as we may wish it to be. These proposals will not solve the encampment problems, but they may help alleviate some of the safety and cleanliness concerns generated by both the business community and neighboring residents in better managing the city's sidewalks, streets, and green spaces not designated for overnight sheltering. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davey. Councillor Everett, followed by Councillor Skaken.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and I would move that Council not endorse the proposed centralized encampment management approach as outlined in the report dated July 6, 2022 from the City Manager and the Director of Public Safety, titled Approach to Encampment Management and Associated Issues.
Okay, we have a seconder. It's on the floor. Councillor Everett, you're good?
Your Worship?
Yep.
I understand the struggle that staff is doing by our direction. I understand the struggle that we are all dealing with on this particular subject matter, but I do not believe that expanding the places for people to congregate in a legal framework assists us in solving the problem. As has already been said, the issue is bigger than just simply having places for people to go. It's about what is needed for our community to come together to assist people that are homeless, who are in need of addiction help, and saying to them, you can go to a park between 7 and 7 does not address that problem. We already have difficulties trying to police our neighborhoods right now. Expanding and saying it's all right to go to a different area spreads out our resources for the RCMP, spreads out our resources for the fire department and rescue. I want us to be able to focus collectively together to work on solutions, but I don't believe the one in front of us, Your Worship, does that. I think it exacerbates the situation for each and every one of our citizens if the park happens to be next to them. And I believe that there's some more work for us to do for the Miller addition where the park exists and where the judge said we can't remove that. For the life of me, I don't understand his reasoning. He's putting an onus on this city that belongs to the provincial government. It has nothing to do with us except that there's citizens within our community that we want to help and assist and make their life better. So thank you, Your Worship, for that.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification, Ms. Connolly, if recommendation 1 passes this evening, recommendation 2, 3, and 4 become invalid, correct?
That's correct, Your Worship, and Council may still consider recommendation 5
yes,
if you wish.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have Councillor Councillor Skaken. If you hit your green button, you're in.
Thanks, Your Worship. You know, first of all, to staff, you know, this is, they've done tons and tons of work on this, the RCMP, bylaw services, senior administration, and this, you know, and I will support Councillor Everett, has nothing to do with not supporting them. I'm totally frustrated with the Chief Justice decision because, you know, my experience, what happened last winter, we could never get the encampment down to no people living there to fulfill the obligation of the Chief Justice to say that they all had shelters, because there was folks, as I understood, in the shelter that had places to go, but said they didn't. So we basically lost a court case on that. And my concern going forward, we're going to open it up to 3 or 4 other spots where some of those folks can say the same thing, that they don't have shelters, and then what are we going to do with all the staff that have to try and monitor those and get them out of there? You know, so it is challenging, Your Worship. BC Housing has done a lot of work. You know, the Native Friendship Center and other groups have done a lot of work. And this is extremely challenging, and it's a few people in those encampments that are making it bad for everybody. You know, what they do to a spot, if we allow them to go to Connaught Hill, they'll get so entrenched in there. The slope is steep. You know, we're going to end up they'll end up destroying part of Connaught Hill, and the residents in that area don't deserve this. And I guess just a question to administration on with the decision to come up with those, and I know council was involved with those different areas. Have we reached out to the people in the Connaught area and the folks next to the Patricia encampment to get you know, their feedback on this latest proposal, as opposed to just it coming out last Wednesday night?
No, of course not, Your Worship. I don't suppose anyone would want an encampment next to their neighborhood.
No, sorry, Your Worship. Like, I'm just wondering, have we reached out to them at all prior to, you know, to formulate this plan?
We have not, Your Worship.
Okay, so you know, that in itself is a problem. It's a difficult one, and I have no problem supporting this Safe Streets bylaw, Your Worship. We have to do something. And to administration, the mention was that if we do have this in place, then we can enforce the Safe Streets bylaw better. But what happens if the Patricia stays there because of the court case? Are we still going to have the Safe Streets bylaw to fall back on?
Your Worship, my understanding is the Safe Streets bylaw only applies to sidewalks, boulevards, and streets. So our green spaces, without designating a location, means that we do not have the legal authority to move folks off of green spaces.
So I'll just leave it at that, Your Worship, and see what some of my colleagues have to say. It's difficult. The court hasn't helped us at all. We've done a ton of work, and so many of the responsibilities aren't ours, but yet we're picking up the cost for those. And I guess one last question. With the different areas, what kind of safety plan do we have in place, or has administration developed to protect you know, the people that go to the Y and Carrie Jane Gray, the Millennium Park and the businesses there, Miller Connaught?
We're not there, Your Worship. I mean, to be very clear,
Yeah.
if other sites emerged like Lower Patricia, it'd be similar behavior. The city does not have the capability to go in there and manage the site. So anywhere these sites are going to form, you're likely going to see an increase in lots of social discord.
So if we designate Lower Patricia, yeah, we're stuck with it the way I see it. Does that still give us the ability to prevent folks from going in other parks?
That's our current understanding, Your Worship. So if Lower Patricia is designated as the only site in Prince George, combined with the amendments to the Safe Streets bylaw, this would allow us to enforce those bylaws everywhere. So in effect, overnight sheltering would only be permitted in Lower Patricia.
Okay, and I know the motion's on the floor, Your Worship. I'm sorry for taking up a bit of time. I don't know if you know, more community consultation is worth it in this point. We've got a lot of letters to council in the past several days. I want to make sure we can enforce people not going into other parks. But as far as the alternatives here, I can't support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to Councillor Ramsey, I think, Mr. Davey, by the court decision, Lower Patricia encampment is in place and we can't do anything about it. So it's not about us authorizing the legitimacy of that camp and saying we endorse that. The fact of the matter is that it has been done so by the court.
That's correct, Your Worship. The only point to designating Lower Patricia via City of Prince George bylaw gives the city the lawful authority to move folks away from other areas because we have designated a place where they may go, and that is our current understanding of what is required legally.
And is that what the Safe Streets bylaw would do?
The Safe Streets bylaw on its own gives us the authority over the sidewalks,
right,
streets, boulevards, but not the green spaces.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you, Your Worship. A lot of components to this. It's been quite a challenging process. And I don't think there's any one size fits all easy answer, because we've been dealing with this for quite some time, working on this. I believe Ms. Bone calls it a wicked problem, for quite some time. So I have given it a lot of thought, I think, as many of my colleagues have. And I've been thinking about, before we had the encampment, I think that we had an informal decentralized method, and that there were some individuals taking shelter throughout green spaces within the city, but it wasn't necessarily centralized in one big place. And I think that the centralized method is not working for our community right now. I think there's pros and cons. There's benefits, perhaps, that, when people are congregated, it's easy to provide services. But I think that it's also in some ways dangerous, in that if there's a fire or something like that, that it could cause damage to a lot of people that are within close proximity. So either way, either option we go is going to be difficult. But for me, looking at the two options between centralized or decentralized, I go towards the decentralized method, because just thinking back to before we had the encampment, yes, there were few shelters here and there, I think throughout the city, but it wasn't impacting one neighborhood the way it impacts one neighborhood now, and that's the Miller Edition. And I think that it is incredibly unfair for one neighborhood to be going through. I think Mr. Davey in a previous report reported that there was upwards of a 5,000% increase in crime in the community, in that neighborhood, with the encampment there. And I just think it's not fair for that community, that neighborhood, to have, I think in the report it says there's, in the winter months, there was around 2 people in the encampment, and now there's upwards of 70. And again, it's really just, it's really tough. I do think that the encampment is a product of not only a lack of housing from the province, but also a product of our bylaws. We have a safe streets bylaw, which I have opposed from the beginning, because I don't think I've previously stated those reasons. I'm not going to state them again. But the bylaws make it impossible. If you don't have housing, there's nowhere for you to go. The only place for you to go is the encampment. So by opening up overnight sheltering in our green spaces, it would get rid of the need for that encampment. So we've been talking about, how do we deal with the encampment? Some of my colleagues want to get rid of the encampment. This, to me, seems the logical option, is to allow overnight sheltering in our green spaces. To me, 5 spaces isn't enough, and that's why I want to oppose the recommendation from staff and support Councillor Everett in his motion that he's put on the floor. But I am opposing for different reasons. I think that we need to look at that decentralized method. That's something that I would like to explore. And so I would like, after perhaps this motion, to put a motion on the floor for us to have a report back to look at what that decentralized method looks like, if there is support for that around the table. It's a tough call either way. I think it philosophically, where you sit philosophically, you're going to choose decentralized or centralized. It's not just an easy decision. It is really about what you believe is best for the community. I know we're all trying to do what we think is best. But that's perhaps where I'm going with this. It is a really tough decision tonight. But I don't think I'll be supporting the staff recommendation, because I think that we need to expand it more and move back to that informal, decentralized method that we had previously. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Councillor Kraus.
Well, thank you, Worship. And I certainly won't be supporting the decentralized concept either. I had conversations with some community workers today, and they raised concerns that I have as well. Where would these individuals go during the day? And so they have to pack up their stuff and wander the streets with their stuff until they can go back and find a spot to go to sleep. So I think that I will not be supporting decentralized. I think the reality is people will have choices. They will do as they did in the past. People will make choices about whether or not they stay in Lower Patricia, and they will go to green spaces they choose. And I'm sure that it will be as it was in the past. It will be complaint driven, and they might get 3 or 4 days or even a week in a spot, and then have to move on. So I think they certainly do have options. One of the things I want to say to the bottom line for me is the health and well-being of the individuals that are in the camps. Camps are not safe places, as we already know, and I'm very concerned about the vulnerable people who currently go to the camps, maybe because there's no other option, or they feel there's no other option, and then they're vulnerable to all kinds of things. So especially, well, and not especially, everybody's vulnerable. So it really is about keeping that in mind. I do have concerns also about the residents of the Miller Edition. They deserve safe space as well. And so I will have a question at some juncture here about us providing the same level of security that we provide downtown. We provide the property owners downtown with all kinds of resources and protections as much as we can. I think Miller Edition should be afforded exactly the same. So that's my concern, and I think that certainly will be my stand. Let's see. I think that's it for me. I really believe that the people do have choices, and they will take them. The people don't just do as we tell them to do, and they're not a herd, and they won't just do as they're told. So they'll make their own choices. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sampson.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thanks to my colleagues for their comments, and also to Mr. Davey and your team for your work on this report. I thought I'd start with, I think we've had a lot of feedback. Some folks in the community upset that there's not been consultation to this point on these locations, and I just thought I'd add my comment to that. I think it would be inappropriate for staff to have gone out and done consultation at this point. This is for council to determine, and it would be our job, if we chose to move forward on any one or multiple of those locations, to direct staff to perform consultation. So I just thought I'd put that out there. Staff's just doing their job, bringing recommendations, and if we chose to move forward, it would be prudent for us to say, now we go do consultation if that's something that we were interested in doing as a council. So I just thought I'd start with that. Nothing's been decided yet. It's just a starting point, and consultation can continue after. The notion of where will they go, where will they put their stuff, I guess perhaps I might need more information. The City of Prince George contributes to a program that provides storage opportunities for folks in need, I believe. Is that perhaps through to Ms. Bowen, if she can just clarify a little bit of that program, provide some information?
Yes, Your Worship. The City provides funding to 2 agencies in our community. One is the Prince George Native Friendship Centre. They operate storage services. and they're soon going to be opening in a larger location on George Street that provides access to more storage. Our other community partner is AWAC, an association advocating for women.
Just excuse me for a minute, Ms. Bowen. One of the things that I'm absolutely adamant about it, that there's respect in this gallery when people are sitting in the gallery, and that's what I expect from the group here this evening. Ms. Bowen has an opportunity to speak to questions from council. They're important questions and important responses, so thank you. Ms. Bowen.
And just to finalize that thought, AUAC also provides storage services for individuals, as well as a myriad of other services that are available for individuals on their site, also on George Street, Your Worship.
Appreciate that, Ms. Bowen. I'm sure the city's not the only funding partner of that program, and I'm sure both organizations are getting some, but do you have any indication on how many units or storage spaces are available?
I don't have that information right in front of me because Prince George Native Friendship Centre has recently enlarged their storage. What I can tell you, though, is both sites are often full. Okay. And that was one of the reasons we looked for expansion with the Prince George Native Friendship Centre. There are other partners involved in the service delivery. It's more than just storage. BC Housing provides funding for outreach staff that help connect people using the storage to other services in the community as appropriate.
Thanks very much. So just to clarify, I guess the larger location is going to help accommodate more, but your professional opinion might be that it will also see that it's at capacity frequently?
Yes, and you have to remember that at both sites, individuals are limited to the amount that they can store, and it tends to be a Tupperware tote that you can see for sale in many retail stores that really allows individuals to store a pretty small amount of goods. Both sites try their best to accommodate other kinds of things for storage, but they really are limited by staff capacity and space.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks, Ms. Bowen. Perhaps I think it was Councillor Skaken who asked a couple questions on this, just maybe some clarity. So on the Lower Patricia site, we are legally required to allow camping or the encampment to be operating at this time. The city cannot legally shut that site down.
That is correct, Your Worship. The site will remain in place, so regardless if it's central or decentral, we will have the Lower Patricia encampment until which time there is suitable housing for all. I'm not sure what that definition is.
Yeah, that's not the city's, that's not something the city provides. That's something that we're working with BC Housing on to find a suitable number of housing and then have to prove that to the courts before we can shut that down.
That's correct, Your Worship. BC Housing is the lead agency on that. It's not the city's jurisdiction.
Thanks for that. I think it's really tough. Actually, before I jump into my thoughts here, one more thing is it seems that we're using centralized and decentralized a little interchangeably as we all go around the table. So if you can maybe just provide a couple sentence clarification on exactly what that looks like for either model.
Of course, Your Worship. So centralized is you have one or more sites. They tend to be, they grow. They're not safe. They're definitely dirty. They're definitely pose health and safety challenges. Decentral is they tend to be out of mind, out of sights. They're dispersed throughout the city, and you tend to get maybe one or two structures. So like it's been mentioned, Prince George had a very ad hoc decentral approach for many years. And again, in 2019, our last year of that, we had around 90 encampments that city staff cleaned up. Again, though, if Lower Patricia exists, the ability to try to disperse that is challenging because we cannot control how humans will behave. So if they choose to stay at Lower Patricia, in effect, you could have a decentralized strategy, but you still have a large centralized encampment.
Because they're legally entitled to be there, whether we choose that as the site or not.
That's right.
Thanks. Yeah, that's tough. I don't want to set up an authorization through our bylaws that allows for Lower Patricia because, frankly, I don't believe it's a safe site. We've seen mountains of evidence of really unsafe activity happening there, people being taken advantage of who are vulnerable, people living in unsafe conditions, people preying on vulnerable folks or taking advantage of or abusing, or drug activity, the whole gamut. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't been a proponent of Lower Patricia, because the city isn't equipped to manage that facility and to make it safe. And it's not within our mandate to make it safe, on top of not being equipped to do so. So I've been a proponent of that site not being an encampment, but it's very difficult not to support a centralized approach at that site when we're legally required to have that site open anyways. And so I'm very torn on, well, the courts, whether I like their decision or not, says you have to leave it open, not supporting making that our designated site and allowing folks to go throughout the community is going to have great impacts throughout our community that we cannot control, as you said, but but it also just doesn't seem fair to the folks in the Miller Edition, and I really struggle with that. I think I'm going to leave my comments there for now, Your Worship, listen to the conversation and jump back in. Thanks.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Frizzell, Ms. Connolly, would you mind reading back Councillor Everett's recommendation? I want to work off of Councillor Sampson's clarity around centralized and decentralized.
That Council does not endorse the proposed centralized encampment management approach as outlined in the report dated July 6, 2022 from the City Manager and the Director of Public Safety titled Approach to Encampment Management and Associated Issues.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly. Appreciate it. Councillor Frizzell, followed by Councillor Scott, and then to Councillor Kraus.
Thank you, Mayor Hall. And you anticipated where I was going to go through to Ms. Connolly. If none of the 5 recommendations go through tonight, that means there's no additional recognition. Would that mean that we would fall back to the same tools that were in place before tonight?
So, Your Worship, through to Councillor Frizzell, there are 2 alternatives in the staff report, one being a decentralized encampment approach, and the second being a continued assessment of current initiatives and continued development of partnerships. So those would be the 2 alternatives, in addition to anything else that Council desires to consider.
Thank you, Mayor Hall. Through to Ms. Connolly, again, given our legislative calendar, Councillor Ramsey had said maybe we can come back to discuss decentralized, but what would that look like? Because the summer is ticking, and in August, I know we've got 3 weeks. We don't have meetings. Is it feasible to still consider other ones if centralized does not go through tonight?
I would defer to Mr. Babich or Mr. Davey to provide a bit more information, but in terms of a report back. But as you mentioned, we do have a break, and so we have one more council meeting in July at the end, the 25th, and then our next meeting after that is August 15th. So there is a 2-week break.
Thank you. Mr. Babich, did you want to?
Thank you, Your Worship. So depending on the motion that's on the floor currently, if the motion passes, then as Ms. Connolly indicated, that takes recommendations 2 through 4 off the table, so to speak. So administration, after consideration of recommendation 5 by council, if it so chooses, would be looking for additional direction from council as to what council would like to see next. And so we would invite council in those circumstances to either put on the floor to report back on the decentralized encampment management approach, or alternatively, the second alternative, assessment of current initiatives and continued partnership development, essentially maintaining the status quo and continuing with advocacy. If council would like to hear more about that, then we would invite council to put that on the floor following its consideration of the other recommendations, and we would report back as soon as we can. I would not want to make any promises before going to staff in terms of the timing, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mayor Hall, and I think that discussion highlights what we've been grappling with for better part of 2 years. Is it must sound like the longest stream of discussion about the interplay between intergovernmental jurisdictions and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms versus the Community Charter, and the interplay between them must seem incredibly frustrating when the problem seems really easy to understand. The words I've heard are occupation, desperation, legislation, opposition, and reconciliation. But when we go back to what we're supposed to be doing, the Community Charter says We got to provide services laws. We got to provide stewardship of the public assets and foster economic, social, and environmental well-being. And that's what I've heard all around the table, everybody wanting to solve this, but it is a near impossible problem. So what we do is look for what we're all in agreement on, and that's we got to protect people. We got to protect all of our citizens and give them the best chance they can have, whether they're housed or dehoused. So through to Mr. Davey, I'm going to just take a comment you made out of context and ask for a little bit of background. You said earlier tonight, we don't have the capability to enforce bylaws in Lower Patricia Boulevard. Those were specific bylaws, and those are ones that, because of the nature of being the first people to have to address this with the Supreme Court, we're being prevented from doing some things, or it doesn't seem like we have the capacity to do that. But we also have the responsibility to enforce all the bylaws that we enforce everywhere else in the city. How does that work? What's the interplay that prevents us from having the capability to enforce bylaws there where we do everywhere in the city?
Thanks, Your Worship. So again, any bylaws is complaint driven, and yes, we've had a tremendously high number of calls for that site. Safe Streets bylaw does not apply there because it's not a street or a boulevard or a sidewalk. There are other bylaw tools, but the challenge is none of these structures are legal. Building code and fire code does not apply to these types of structures. So enforcing a bylaw on city-owned property where we have not one but two court losses in the Supreme Court is admittedly a gray area that seems to lack clarity across the board.
And that lacking of clarity puts us into this big ravine that leaves people unsafe. And it's a problem the Supreme Court isn't against. They're trying to help solve, but they have to abide by the charter. The province wants to solve it. They have to deal with this problem all over the province, and we have to try to solve it, but we're prevented from doing it. I don't think the tools we've got and that are proposed solve the problem. By all means, they don't. But do they get us the closest to making as many people safe as we possibly can?
At the end of the day, Your Worship, this will be an experiment. But from currently what we see, in our view, yes, perhaps the vast majority of folks downtown may feel somewhat safer and cleaner, and seeing that there will be bylaw and police action to assist some of their calls for service.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Hall.
Thank you. Councillor Scott, green button, you're in.
Thank you, Worship. I guess I'm with everyone else in that I'm struggling. I have received all the emails that the rest of council has received, and some of those people who wrote those emails are in the gallery this evening. And to them I say thank you. Thank you for taking the time and energy to put your thoughts and concerns into writing. I'm also mindful of the many people in our community who are not physically present this evening, but who've also reached out and said, we don't get it. And one of the reasons I was grateful that we were finally bringing this to an open meeting this evening is that people needed to hear, maybe in a way they hadn't heard before, what we as a council can and cannot do. I take to heart Councillor Ramsey's admonition many months ago that we cannot demonize people who are homeless. And it's not my task to do that, or not my intention to do that. I would rather support and uphold people who are struggling. It's easier to support and uphold people who are struggling, who want to be helped. And it's kind of sorting through to see who those people are. And I appreciate the comments from my colleagues this evening. I can't support decentralizing the encampment because I believe it exacerbates the whole situation in a different sense. I would like to see us come away from this evening with a determination to dialogue more completely with the people who are living in Moccasin Flats, the people who are serving the people who are living there, and continuing to come to a better understanding of how we together can exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kraus.
Well, thank you, Worship. Thanks for letting
Green
me back
button.
in. I just wanted to confirm that no matter where we go on this, at this juncture anyway, the campers in Lower Patricia will not be required to pack up in the morning and come back in the evening. That's, as far as I read the court decision, is it's full-time, permanent at this juncture.
It's my understanding, Mr. Davey, Mr. Babich.
That's correct, Your Worship. So Lower Patricia is really external to the other sites here, right? So what is there, and what grows there, grows there.
Okay.
The other sites would be specific to that 7 p.m. to 9 a.m.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just feel like we haven't done anything on, I don't know how to put this. I think one of my colleagues, Councillor Kraus, said I'm against the decentralized model, and I'm also against the centralized model. So I guess I'm curious what my colleagues are for when, those are the two options before us. If we're against decentralization and we're against centralization around the table, or we're split, what is the next step? I think Councillor Scott said it best in that I think we need consultation. There's a really great phrase that gets used often, nothing about us without us. And I think we really need to start doing some engagement with our community, because we're at odds, we're stuck, we're stalemated. We've been this way since last summer. And in order to move forward, we need to do something. We need to find some sort of path. And if this doesn't pass tonight, I just fear that we're going to be, or if it fails, this is the step that administration came up with. So if this is declined by council, what is the next step for us? For me, it just seems like we're waiting for BC Housing and the province to come forward with housing, and that's going to take forever. We need to find other solutions. And I recognize that housing is in our jurisdiction. I recognize that, but I just feel like waiting and waiting and waiting isn't working. So we do need a next step. And I'm at that point where I want to try solutions and see if they work for our community, and if not, find another solution. So if someone has a suggestion to put on the table or on the floor, I want to look at it. I want to look at it and critically think through it and look at whether or not it will impact us in a positive way. I'm just honestly frustrated. I think you can hear it. I think we're all frustrated. But what is the next step for us if this doesn't pass? Perhaps administration, Mr. Babich, can comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in terms of encampment management, the two approaches have been outlined by Mr. Davey, and they're set out in the report. The alternative is to continue with the advocacy and collaborative approach with our partner agencies that we've been doing to date. And admittedly, it's taking quite some time, but that's the alternative that we would present to council, is continuing to build with that collaboration and advocacy, both locally and provincially. And Your Worship, in terms of what the city has done to date, I believe it's fair to say the city's done a lot in trying to address this issue. the report just sets out in a few bullet points all of the initiatives that the city has tried so far. As indicated by Mr. Davey, housing, healthcare, and social supports are ultimately the responsibility of the province. The role of municipalities is to support the province in fulfilling those responsibilities. And Your Worship, I believe that City Council has done a lot in that regard. We have the First Avenue site to point to, where it was the City of Prince George, through its taxpayers, purchased that site and offered it to the province for the supportive housing units that you see there, the first 50, and we're continuing to advocate for the integrated health and housing project that Council is very much aware of. We can't stop with that. We need to continue with the advocacy, and with Council's direction, that's the type of report you would see back, is some strategies to try and accelerate those types of initiatives through the province, Your Worship. I don't know if Mr. Davey or Ms. Bone would like to offer anything in addition to that. No. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Babich.
Thanks, Mr. Babich, for that comment. I do appreciate the advocacy approach. I guess the only reason I'm feeling a little frustrated, especially when we talk about, hey, we did advocacy and we got the First Avenue project, but what's not really being mentioned is that it took 20 years of advocacy for that First Avenue project. Talking to councillors around the table who have been there for 20 plus years, you know, hearing stories about, oh yeah, this project almost came through this many times. I remember seeing plans for it in, 15 years ago, and then 10 years ago, and 5 years, and here we are. So I'm a firm believer in advocacy and lobbying, and I will absolutely support that method, but I just don't know that it can be the only thing we rely on moving forward. So I'll just leave it at that.
Councillor Sampson, Everett, and Skaken.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Lots in the discussion. Perhaps through Mr. Davey, you mentioned earlier, I can't recall the exact number, how many folks estimated are living at the Lower Patricia site currently?
It's just an estimate, Your Worship, and keep in mind the population's quite transient and shifting, but we believe it's somewhere from 30 to 70. And again, you saw that growth where we had 1 in the winter, and then 3 to 5 or so in the spring, and then it's shot up. But as of today, we're seeing some shifting back to Millennium Park.
Do you know where the folks who are camping are coming from? 30 to 70 up from 1 over winter. Were they living elsewhere during the winter months? Did they have shelter inside, like a Night's Inn when that was full? Is that no longer full, or are folks choosing to be outside? You might not know that.
I really can't answer, Your Worship. I'd probably have to defer to BC Housing or the Native Friendship Centre who operates that site.
I think that would be interesting to find out if folks come to Prince George in the warmer months, or if folks who had maybe housing in the winter, maybe they don't love that housing situation, but they're choosing not to keep it in the summer months because the weather is more manageable for camping or whatever. I don't know the answer, but that would be interesting. And I think that kind of raises a good point. And I think Mr. Babish just said the city's done lots, and I would agree. I mean, we've spent millions and millions of dollars and thousands of people hours addressing issues that are really not within our expertise, our area of expertise, our jurisdiction. And where is the province? Where are they on this? Where is Attorney General Minister Eby? Where is BC Housing? I mean, I'm not trying to say that they're not doing anything, but where are they? I don't feel like we're getting that team approach on this issue. The City of Prince George is tackling this alone, and our staff are taking the brunt of it, and they're doing the best they can, and they're taking it on the chin. And I just appreciate the work that our staff is doing to pick up the slack that, frankly, I think is not being carried by the province and BC Housing under their mandate. We just, as was mentioned, we bought the land, and I think it's in the report. We bought the land, and they built 50 new units on First Avenue. Who's living in them? Are they full yet? Are they people who are in Lower Patricia? Because that's what we were told. This is a complex care type facility. It's going to be more low barrier. It's going to provide opportunity for folks who don't fit into that shelter model or don't fit into that nights in model. But we have 70 people, upwards of 70 people living in Lower Patricia. I'm having a hard time understanding where the folks are coming from, why they're not in any of the housing that BC Housing has told us has been created in our community. It's really, I guess the numbers aren't adding up, it seems. We keep getting told, for my whole term on council, we've been told there's enough housing. BC Housing has said there's enough housing or shelter space in Prince George for everybody who's homeless. Okay, then we get the court, decision here saying there's not enough housing, so you have to leave it open. Okay, BC Housing saying we've built more housing, there is housing available, we're adding more daily, but yet there's 30 to 70 people living there, and that doesn't include Millennium Park or any of the dispersed encampments that we're seeing around town. So I guess, where is the province? Where is BC Housing? I'm not understanding this. And so I'm going to come back later, Your Worship, and make a motion that we formally request BC Housing and representatives from Minister Eby's office come and present to Council and give us their plan, tell us what they're doing, and tell us what's going on. Because I think in a public meeting, we need to hear about that. We need to hear from the province, and we need to hear, hey, this is what we're doing. What are you doing? Where's your part in this? Because, our staff are tapped out, and none of us have come up with great answers tonight either. So we need to hear from the folks whose job it is. And I think the public deserves to hear what they're doing as well. It shouldn't be a phone call conversation between us and the minister. It should be, come, sit in our chambers and tell us what you're doing in our community, because the public and the people of Prince George and the folks living in these conditions downtown deserve to hear that. So anyways, I'll come back, Your Worship, and make that motion. Lower Patricia has to remain legally. So I don't support keeping Lower Patricia for the fact that I think it's unsafe. We've heard enough evidence that it is not safe living conditions. Doesn't mean that I don't want these people to have a place to camp necessarily. I don't want them in our parks because I think that makes it less accessible to all. But I don't want unsafe conditions for anybody. My concern is that if we endorse Lower Patricia as the chosen area for centralized camping, we're taking on a degree of liability and responsibility to manage that site when really at this point it's the province's responsibility. They've said you have to leave that open. Okay, then step up and provide services, step up and provide safety measures, step up and provide what is needed to make sure that camp is safe for people and is not impacting our community and the Miller Edition, the neighbors, in such a negative way. But we're not seeing that. So if we endorse that today, I'm concerned that we are saying, don't worry, once again, the City of Prince George is going to step up and make sure all those things are taken care of, but we don't have those resources. We're not prepared to do that, or equipped to do that, I should say, or prepared, I don't think. We don't have millions and millions of dollars more to spend on this. So I can't support us endorsing Lower Patricia to be our centralized location, because I think it takes this, the City of Prince George is essentially once again saying, don't worry, province of BC, we've got this. But we can't do it right, and we don't have the staff or the manpower or the experience or the tools to do it right. So that would be a disservice to the entire community, including the folks who are living down there, because they should expect a degree of safety wherever they're told they're allowed to camp. I also don't support spreading this out into other parks and areas, because we're just going to create further issues. So we're in a bit of a lose-lose going forward here, but my motion is going to be that I'm going to stick with what's on the floor, that we don't endorse going ahead with the centralized encampment, especially at Lower Patricia, because it's already required to be there. So then we're going to come back and I'll make a motion that has BC Housing and representatives from the Attorney General's office come in to explain what they're going to do about this, because this is their responsibility, and we're going to continue to advocate that they step up and take care of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Everett. Councillor Skaken.
Well, thank you, Worship. And the motion that's in front of us talks about not endorsing the expansion of the encampments. We need to set aside the Lower Patricia. It's a separate issue. The judge has ruled on that. That's going to be there. And to try and put it back together with this group, in my opinion, is not the right way to look at it. We need to accept the fact that it's there. And there, as Councillor Ramsey talked about, there's a need for some further communication and lobbying and advocacy, whatever the word is that you want to do, to move this forward. But I caution us on demanding what the province does. We need to approach the province with the eye of cooperation rather than the stick of you not doing your job, Mr. Province or Mr. Federal Government, in my humble opinion. We will not get far if we demand somebody to do something. They will tell us, you take your problem and you work on it, because it's in your community and it's our citizens that are saying we've got a significant problem that we need to deal with. And I'm happy to have some further collaboration with folks around that issue to make sure that when we finish talking to everybody, we got the best opportunity to go at the problem and fix the many fingers that this problem has. It's not a simple problem of just the folks that are on the encampment, has been said time and time again tonight. It's about the rest of the citizens in the Miller Addition that are right close to that, and what our police force needs to do around making sure that everybody's secure. And when we focus them all over the place, we can't do a good service for our citizens, or our fire department moving around the city all over the place. We need a cautious approach, and yes, it takes a lot longer than we really want it to be, but time we've got, and we need to do it right, rather than finding a quick solution that puts it out there and says, this is going to fix it, because it's got many fingers, as I said before, and it isn't something that we can quickly fix overnight. It didn't get this way overnight. It came over a long period of time, and it's going to take some more time to get it fixed right.
Thank you. Councillor Skaken.
Well, thank you, Worship. I briefly get in the queue again, but when it was mentioned that it was wholly inappropriate or something to have consultation with the neighborhoods, I totally disagree. We can't come up with the agenda on a Wednesday and expect the neighborhood to be excited about not be included with some sort of communication. So that has to be part of it going forward. And to Councillor Ramsey's comments about inaction, basically, of council, this going back 20 years, I just have to remind her and the group that we didn't have massive encampments. We didn't have all these legal issues until about 2 or 3 years ago. And the downloading and offloading from the province has reached a tipping point. So that's why we're here now dealing with these issues. It's all been dumped on us, literally. And so I support Councillor Everett's motion, and I think we have to direct administration probably a little broader than what they said in here as an alternative to have some additional feedback. But of course, this is frustrating, Your Worship, and I do think we need some communication with the residents, and we're not, this has been going on for years. We're not going to solve it in the next couple of weeks or possibly the next couple of months. But I do think we have to prevent the encampments from expanding, do what we can to, have some sort of coordinated effort to have that Patricia encampment manageable for now, and go from there. So thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anybody else in the queue. I'll just say a few words. It is frustrating. I probably receive 2 or 3 emails a day, a few phone calls a day about what's happening at the encampment. And it's landed squarely on the shoulders of council, the mayor's office, and our city staff. I have a couple things that I want to point out. Lots of the conversation tonight was about the encampment. I want to turn that table a bit and talk about the Miller Addition. Not fair to any community, any neighborhood, to have drastic change, as you've seen over the past couple of years. One of the things we talk a lot about is how do we provide services to the Miller Addition when it comes to bylaw services, RCMP patrols, something you're not used to. And I think that RCMP and bylaw services have done a very good job. Are there issues still there? Without question. So I think that needs to be a focus as well. And I guess what I'm looking for is a balance of understanding for those of you that are here tonight from the Miller Addition, and those of you that are here tonight supporting the encampment or looking to see what council is going to do and hoping that we'll be favorable in your opinion. For me, I just want you to understand the balance that this council has to juggle and what we try to do. I've said many times at meetings I want nonprofit and service organizations to understand the balance that I have to deal with as the mayor and council has to deal with as councillors, and us as a whole when it comes to trying to make changes, trying to make and put in different programs and try to help the businesses. And at the same time, what are we going to do about the social issues that are happening on our streets? I just want you to give some consideration to that balance. Downtown businesses and the protection. We have ongoing RCMP patrols, ongoing bylaw service patrols. At this point, the city is really put in a position where we need to be all things to all people, and that's a difficult spot to be, particularly given the situation we're talking about tonight. Jurisdictional responsibility, I've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years, and you've heard it this evening. We're not responsible for housing. We're not responsible for health care. What we're responsible for is bylaw services and policing. But we have taken on an enormous task, and Ms. Bone heads that department and is probably one of the most qualified people to speak to the issues that we're talking about tonight, and has worked diligently in trying to bring the community together. Staff may not have any more options. You know, if there's a motion on the floor this evening to have staff do something more, I'm not sure what more there is. If there was a solution, which there isn't, if there was another option for us to employ, I don't know what that is. This is one of the most troubling issues that any municipality in this country will face. The city of San Francisco spends $1 billion a year dealing with this issue. $1 billion. And I think over the last few years, Councillor Skaken, you mentioned we probably are about 1.5 million, 1.2 million, in excess of $1 million. Trying to satisfy the balance. And we're having a tough go. You know, when I take a look at the Lower Patricia encampment, concerned about safety for the Miller residents, concerned about safety for our RCMP and our first responders, our firefighters. I'll tell you, if there's ever a fire in there, terrible, just terrible, and we've had a couple. You know, one of the things that I had talked to staff about was, can we at least remove the garbage? And I'm not talking about somebody's possessions. I'm talking about garbage. No different than what you and I put in our receptacle once a week so that the city can come around and collect our garbage. And I'm not sure, Mr. Davey, if we can even do that. You know, that has an impact on the encampment. It has a health impact on the encampment. So I'm going to definitely support Councillor Everett's motion this evening. And I would like to speak to, and I know that Councillor Sampson will put forward a motion in a bit. Really, for me, it's about a solution-orientated approach with the province and with BC Housing, which is one, you know, BC Housing is part of the province. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we go to them with solutions. What I'm suggesting is let's have that solution-based approach, that conversation about here's our situation, you can see it firsthand, how do we deliver, what do we deliver, and how can you help out? We've had great success with the BC Urban Mayors Caucus on a number of issues in taking that approach, and I think we have the opportunity to do this. So anyway, have a bit more to say in a bit, and I'll just leave it at that. I've got nobody else in the queue. We have a recommendation on the floor that Councillor Everett put forward. All those in favor of that recommendation? Those opposed? Councillor Scott's opposed. Opposed on Zoom? That carries 7-1. Is there 8 of us? Yes, 7-1. Okay, the next one on our list, therefore, recommendations 2, 3, and 4 are no longer, Ms. Conley, and recommendation 5. Do you want to, can I turn that over to you, Mr. Babich? Mr. Davey?
Your Worship, I believe Mr. Davey gave an overview, but if Council would like to remind you of recommendation 5.
So in the queue for the Safe Streets bylaw, please.
Move 5.
5 is move, seconder on 5. Okay, Councillor. Okay, yeah, thanks. I have Councillor Segakin. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, this is.
If you just hit your green button.
This is, I guess, a lot of work went into the Safe Streets bylaw, Your Worship. It's not just about the downtown. It's about throughout the town how we can make this street safer, and I definitely will support it. And it's not penalizing. And we talked about this as being an educational tool versus penalizing people that can't pay, Your Worship. And our bylaw services staff do a great job. The RCMP do a great job. They're compassionate. They're not going out there, arresting people, finding people and everything for sleeping on the streets or living on the streets. So there's definitely a compassionate approach. But we have to do something with the rest of the town, Your Worship, and I definitely support this. A lot of work went into it, a lot of debate at Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sampson, followed by Councillor Kroos.
Nope, that's everything, Your Worship. I was just going to make a couple comments, but that's good. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Kroos, and then Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Babbitt suggested that maybe we clarify again exactly what we're voting on. People at home or here may not know exactly what we're. This is an amendment to the Safe Streets bylaw. The Safe Streets bylaw is already in effect, so amendment is being proposed. So,
would you like to speak to that then, Mr. Davey? Clarification on 5.
That's correct, Your Worship. So the amendment allows the city and the RCMP to seize chattel, that is debris and property that is not claimed for on the sidewalk. So right now when our bylaw staff go by, if there's a pile of debris or personal possessions that may be hard to define if it's one person's garbage and another person's treasure, this allows us to seize it, and we will hold it for 30 days. And there's a process that will be developed and communicated out on how folks could reclaim their possessions if they don't take them on the day.
So they will have the chance to get those back.
Absolutely, Your Worship. And again, this is the kind of our last option, right? I mean, it's a progressive bylaw, so when bylaws comes to talk to folks, when that call for service comes in, perhaps bylaws is working with our social outreach workers, and they're trying to provide services and trying to help the folks that may need it. So this is really that gap where we've gone through all of those steps, and now there's debris on the sidewalk, and obviously we don't want to dispose of that in the trash. We want to keep it just in case it might be someone's possessions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ramsey, please.
Thanks, Your Worship. I have been publicly opposed to the Safe Streets bylaw. I continue to be opposed to the Safe Streets bylaw, including the amendment that's proposed tonight. Reading through one particular section, I just couldn't get behind, and that is that the 5.3 through to 5.5, I believe, that chattel that's seized and unclaimed within 30 days, if it has a market value, can be sold at auction. And I'm sorry, but I'm just not in support of that. I don't think it's right. So I won't be supporting this amendment. I'm opposed.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Worship. And to Mr. Davies, if I could, what have we been doing in the past when there was debris, as you indicated, on the sidewalk?
Your Worship, prior to 2019, 2020, it was removed and disposed of. Last couple of years, the environment has changed substantially, and now it's a gray area. So bylaw staff at present do not remove or dispose of anything on the street. And this is where we're seeing this conflict in the use of public space, where customers will call in and say, well, there is debris outside and we do not have the ability to remove that. So this corrects that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I still find some significant difficulty with this bylaw.
I don't have anybody else in the queue. I just have a couple of questions, Mr. Davey. Here at City Hall, we see on most mornings piles of cardboard, and in a couple instances we've seen a blanket or two, 2x4s, small pieces of plywood. So what category would that fall under? I mean, it's a difficult call because it may well be that the individual who has that is going to be back that night.
It's a great point, Your Worship. Right now, there is no category for that. So if the call for service goes into Parks and Solid Waste Services, I would defer to Mr. McIntosh, but my understanding is it would be disposed because a reasonable person may judge that to be refuse.
Right.
What this bylaw allows us to do, and bear in mind, we haven't developed the administrative procedure to actually carry it out and define how it will be operationalized, but we're trying to remove the gray area. And as we know, we had a court loss where the city thought we were removing debris and others thought we were removing other stuff. So we want to make sure we don't do that again, Your Worship.
Thank you. But my other point is that you just brought up a good point actually around the operational procedure. So if this is passed this evening, you would come back to council with a procedure that would be in place for staff and for us to take a look at. Is that the intent?
Your Worship, it's generally pretty tactical level information, but what we're striving to do is to have that information publicly available so folks kind of understand the process of how we go through it.
Okay, and I think that's so important, and I'm glad Ms. Rogers is still here. How do we communicate out if this is passed this evening what we are doing? And I have great faith in our bylaw services folks and would probably think that they would still use an educational approach to start with. That would be my gut feeling when it comes to the operations side of things. I could be wrong. Charlotte is here this evening as well. This isn't about our bylaw folks causing havoc on the streets. I think what we're trying to do is open up these spaces where people are trying to get into their places of business, and there is an option. And I want to talk about that option for a moment. If in fact you collect bylaw services or parks collect what they see on a sidewalk, it's abandoned. How are the folks informed, or how do people know that they've got 30 days to claim this, and where can they go to claim it? I think that's probably part of your operational procedure that you're talking about.
Absolutely, Your Worship. Admittedly, there is some work to do on this to how we will operationalize it. It is exceedingly difficult when there is stuff just left on the street, and if you're a bylaw officer who's got numerous calls to respond to in a day, we have to provide a quick and easy procedure so we can get on with the next call for service.
Okay. And I guess that's what I'm hanging my hat on. This could pass this evening, but we're still looking at the operational piece and what that looks like when you get those guidelines in place for staff. Okay, thank you. Next, Councillor Sampson, followed by Crouse.
Thanks, Your Worship, for letting me in. Just a couple quick questions on this. This will have a cost implication, will it not, of storing potential garbage?
There could be operational costs, Your Worship. I mean, again, that's where bylaws and Civic Works will have to look at a site that can be used and how it would actually be transported. Again, it all depends on the size. If we're just talking a few pieces of debris, it can go into a bag. If it's something more substantial, like pallets, a bunch of gear, obviously we could have quite the storage facility. So it's going to be iterative. To be very clear, this is a bit of an experiment.
Is this something that if we come across what appears to be abandoned shelter, the city put notice on it and say, if the city does not get contacted back, so we maybe don't take that and store it, we simply put notice on that site and say, you need to contact the city through one of these multiple methods, otherwise this is deemed as disposed of. Is that something that's considered?
I suppose, Your Worship, if that abandoned structure was on a sidewalk, street, or boulevard, the Safe Streets bylaw already gives us the authority to remove it. It's just the question of where is it stored and how, and what is the process for the individual to collect it if he or she so wishes.
Great, thanks. And lastly, this won't impede or change any sort of littering bylaws or anything else. If I dump garbage or needles or anything on the sidewalk and bylaw says, here's a fine, I could say, well, I was just going to come back for that later. I got 30 days to get it from you.
We imagine, Your Worship, there will be a lot of peculiarities with this bylaw, but I think perhaps picture evidence can sometimes speak 1,000 words, and that is something we'll certainly build into the procedure.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Krause.
Thank you, Richard, for letting me back in. And I guess I didn't support the Safe Streets bylaw, and in general I still don't, but I will be supporting this because at this time, this would mean that stuff wouldn't just be thrown in the garbage. It would be retained for a while, because I think the reality is to some people it might be deemed as garbage, but to an individual that might be quite important. It might be the only possessions they have, so I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anybody else.
Sorry, Your Worship.
Go ahead, Councillor Skaken.
Sorry. Just to administration, if this doesn't work, we'll be the first to know. And obviously, if it doesn't work and it's not manageable, I trust that administration is going to come back to us. Is that fair to say?
That's correct, Your Worship. One thing Bylaw Services is doing now is that annual update. And like I mentioned in my opening comments, we have not issued a ticket to date. It is used as an informational tool.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, nobody else in the queue. We have a recommendation. Recommendation 5, all those in the room in favor. Those opposed. Councillor Everett's opposed. Opposed on Zoom.
Opposed.
Councillor Ramsey's opposed. That's passed 6-2. All right, perfect. Staff, thank you so much. Mr. Ravitch, you and your team for the work you've done. I want to thank the folks in the gallery. As you can see from this evening's conversation, this is a tough issue. I want to thank folks that supportive of trying to make things better for those marginalized citizens and vulnerable citizens. It's difficult. I hope you can all appreciate where we're at and the struggles we're having in dealing with this and coming to some balance. So, thank you very much. Councillor Sampson.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm going to make a motion on my comments earlier, as I think it's important. I won't go on my whole long spiel that I made earlier, but the City of Prince George is doing a tremendous amount of work, and we can't do it all, and there's still a lot to be done. The solutions we came up with tonight are not really going to change much of what we're doing. We didn't direct that there's a centralized approach. We didn't direct that there's a decentralized approach. We kind of continue with the status quo. So I move that Council formally request that representatives from BC Housing, the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and the Attorney General's Office come to the City of Prince George, meet with Council, and to inform Council, City staff, and the public of what they are doing to address the issues our community is facing with homelessness and encampments. And I think I'd add that it would be beneficial, although I'm not going to make that part of the formal request, but I think it would be beneficial to receive a public update from the Ministry of Health and Addictions on how they're addressing the severe addictions issues in our community, as that's an additional cause. Homelessness isn't just poverty, it's addictions, it's mental health and other issues. So I think at this time, I want to tackle the BC Housing, Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and Attorney General's Office coming here to explain what their plan is and what they're doing here in Prince George. Give us an update.
Councillor
So
Skaken.
moved.
Sorry, good? Good?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Skaken.
Was that seconded, Your Worship? I don't recall.
Yeah, looking for a seconder. Councillor Scott.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. This is a politically charged issue, and I can appreciate where Councillor Sampson is coming from, but I don't think the province is going to send the ministry reps up here to get the crap kicked out of them. They have been watching, I would say consistently, if there isn't a different word, with what we're doing, what's been said publicly about BC Housing, what's been said publicly about them, even tonight about them not doing enough, Your Worship. I know the Mayor's Caucus is doing work. So, you know, I'm going to speak against this because I think, and perhaps the administration wants to give us some feedback, We need them to be on our side and not for them to see us as some sort of adversary, because there's all sorts of money that they're kicking out for projects and stuff like that, and there's not stop. You know, the ministry can say you're not getting anything this time around. I want to make sure we keep building that relationship, Your Worship, but to try and get 3 ministries here and BC Housing to make some sort of public statements in that, I don't think it's going to happen. So I appreciate the intent, but I won't support it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I can just make a comment before I go to Councillor Everett, that was my comment early on, is that if we take that solution-based approach, I'm not inviting anybody here to beat up on them. That's not what I do. At the end of the day, it's that conciliatory approach, and I think that we can get more with solutions in those discussions. I don't know what they might look like and how we would meet, so I guess the proof is in the pudding. Councillor Everett, Scott, and Sampson.
Well, thank you, Worship. I'd like to propose an amendment that we request a meeting of the following ones that Councillor Sampson did.
Your Worship, the wording was that Council formally requests that representatives from BC Housing, Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and the Attorney General's office come to the City of Prince George and meet with Council to inform Council, City staff, and the public of what they are doing to address these issues in our community with respect to homelessness in the encampments. So the intent's not to browbeat them. The intent is come please and tell us, show us what you're doing so we can share with the public, because we're not the province, so we can't speak on that. But we're being asked what they're doing. So it is a request, not a demand. It's a request. Thanks.
Your Worship, I cannot support the motion as it is at the present time. I think that the flavor of it is you come to us because we're the demanding folks. And maybe that isn't what Councillor Sampson means, but that's how I interpret it. And I think that ministry staff may look at it exactly the same.
Thank you. Councillor Scott, followed by Councillor Sampson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I support this because I know that these people travel up here all the time. And I have no problem sitting face to face to say, work with us. Tell us together what we can do. And I found this a collegial approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, I think Councillor Ramsey has her hand up. Councillor Ramsey.
Thanks, Your Worship. I do support advocacy through to the province, so I will be supporting Councillor Sampson's motion. I do believe perhaps it could be worded differently, but the intent in the end is to have conversations and move forward on agenda items. So I will support it. I do think it could be worded more delicately, but the province will respond as the province will respond. Thanks.
Thank you. Who hasn't been in the queue? I'm going to go to Councillor Krause and Frizzell prior to going back to Councillor Sampson.
Thank you, Worship. I won't be supporting it either. I think that it's making it sound like the province has done nothing. They have funded, through UBCM, a significant number of projects in this community. And I think to put them on the hot, they would feel it when they were being put on the hot seat. And to say that BC Housing is doing nothing, when you look at the number of beds they have put in this community and the number of, it's not just about First Avenue. It's about E. Fry housing. It's about all of those housing units that are preventative in nature. So I think that a more collegial, cooperative approach is the answer. And I think, doing what we've done and working through the Mayor's Caucus and other avenues, I think is the answer. So I will not be supporting this motion as stated. Thank you.
Councillor Frizzell, green button.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Hall, and thank you to Councillor Sampson for bringing the proposal up. I was trying to imagine it either as senior staff representatives or as the elected political representatives. And I like the idea of always having more conversation and the exchange of information towards better solutions. But looking out over the provincial landscape right now, we've got a recently installed leader on one side, we've got a leader who's on his way out on the other side, and a highly charged political atmosphere. I think this is a good idea. I think it isn't the right time for it right now, because I can't see that we're going to get much traction from it at this time. But it is the right place to go because that's their responsibility. Just, I can't see making headway right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sampson.
Thanks for letting me back in, Your Worship, provide some thoughts and clarity. I appreciate where Councillor Frizzell's coming from. PG can't wait for the government. Government can't stop because there's a leadership race. That's my thought there. And when it comes to collegial, and sorry, Councillor Frizzell actually mentioned staff as well, or government officials or elected officials. The wording in this is very specific. I wrote requests representatives from these areas, not the politician, not staff specifically. We're asking them to send somebody, whether it is the politician, whether it is staff. They can determine who's best fit to come and deliver that message here in Prince George. This is not accusatory. Nowhere does this say BC Housing's done nothing, so come and tell us what you're going to do. That's not what this says. This says, please tell us what your plans are going forward with what's going on. We have a lot of issues in our community. Come and share information. This also doesn't come and say, sit in the hot seat at a council meeting and come and speak to us. This says, come to the city of Prince George and meet with council. So whether that's a town hall type meeting that people can watch, whether it's more of a casual conversation where we can disseminate the information because the media is in attendance, this is really open-ended to work with the province on how they want to come and have this conversation. But the expectation is that we're asking you to come and have the conversation at least. What that looks like is not pre-prescribed in this motion. I'll read it one more time just to be sure. I so move that Council formally requests that representatives from BC Housing, Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and the Attorney General's Office, again, representatives being open-ended to who they see best fit, come to the City of Prince George and meet with Council to inform Council, City staff, and the public of what they are doing to address these issues in our community that our community is facing with homelessness and the encampment. This isn't accusatory. This is asking, come and share your message. And if they are doing as much as we're saying that they're doing, they should be proud to come and share that message. Come and tell us what you're doing and tell us how we can better participate. This is a conversation. We're all in this. So I don't get the notion that this is accusatory. It's not. It's asking them to come and share their message with our community. So I'm going to stand by my motion and hope that my colleagues will vote in favor. It's a request.
Councillor Frizzell, followed by Councillor Ramsey.
No, I was through.
Oh,
thank you.
Good. Councillor Ramsey, sorry.
Thanks, Your Worship. Perhaps just to build on Councillor Sampson's points, because I do think this is important. The province announced in Budget 2022 that $633 million was going to be spent on new initiatives around homelessness. Prince George, according to, I think we've all seen, I think it was the BC Coroner's report, or another report that was released on homelessness. We have the highest homelessness rate per capita in the province. We at one point had the highest number of drug toxicity deaths per capita in the province. We are at the epicenter of this wicked problem, as it's been coined. We know that the province is currently working on a homelessness strategy. It's very evident from the ministerial mandate letters. So asking for someone from the province to come and share an update on how that $633 million worth of taxpayer money is being spent in a community that's struggling, I don't think is unrealistic, as well as asking the province, when that homelessness strategy is released, to come and share an update on what it means for a community that is literally number one at the top of the list in that report, likely, is also not unrealistic. So I would urge my colleagues not to be so quick to dismiss this. Yes, the wording of the motion might be messy, but this is a messy problem that we're really struggling with. So if more communication, if this motion has an outcome of increasing communication between us and our community partners, I don't understand why anyone would oppose it. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sampson.
Just lastly, I thought I would add on Councillor Ramsey's post is, fact is we have two BC Liberal representatives in our ridings in Prince George, not NDP. They're not in government. So to speak on exactly what Councillor Ramsey is saying, what government is doing, we don't have those direct contacts here in Prince George. So to have somebody come in, I don't think is far-fetched from government to come and have that conversation. We can speak to our MLAs, but at the end of the day, they're not in government. So to have somebody from government come and speak on behalf of government, and again, this is a request. They might turn around and say, well, we're not sending the Attorney General's office. We're going to send the other two. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting because I, out of my mayor's office, deal a lot with various ministries, and not once would I suggest that BC Housing and other ministries haven't stepped to the plate for the city of Prince George. It's pretty evident that they have. Let's forget about First Avenue then. Let's not talk about First Avenue. Let's talk about everything else that's taking place in this community around housing, supportive housing, low barrier housing, every form of housing that we've seen. Every time we put our hand up, we have had great response from the province. Do we want to meet with them? Sure, there's an opportunity to meet with them. For me, and I don't have an issue meeting. What I have an issue with is what it may look like and what it may turn into. That's my issue. And I have concerns about that, so I won't be supporting this. Okay, the motion's on the floor. All those in favor? Councillor Frizzell, Councillor Sampson. Those opposed? Councillors Everett, Kraus, Hall, and Skaken. Opposed on Zoom?
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Motion's defeated. Thank you.